made a big sensation when we first went on parade. The sergeant major held his breath and then knelt down and prayed. He sent for disinfectant and we all had to be sprayed.
I'm David Robinson, and this is a very special show for me because I had the good fortune to be born and brought up in Lincoln, which was just on the southern edge of the distribution area for Mancunian films. So when I was 9, 10, 11, 12, something like that, there was always the big excitement when there was another Frank Randall or another Norman Evans or whoever it might be coming to town. And so this was my education. And I'm really looking forward to this, not least because the programme is going to be presented by, somebody whose education it also was, but rather later on the Bakelite, that square thing. He didn't see them properly. So Henry himself, Mike Livesey.
Cheers. Thank you. I've got a thing here, I think it works. Oh. Lovely to see you all today. This is one of those things that doesn't really seem to translate too well to the south, from what I can gather, as don't I, really. So I feel real kinship with the likes of Frank Randall, etc. So first of all, I think what is the best way, the best place to start is I've put together a little montage of some of the sort of the funny people that were in these movies, because as Jimmy James, who is the best drunk actor that ever came out of these aisles in this time, the way he put it was that people from the north don't say funny things, they say things funny. So let's have a look at some people saying things funny. Oh, where's my clicker? Hey, we've had some fun this afternoon, I tell thee. And
what do you really want?
Well, I want 6 penny worth of chips, half a pound of tripe, a cow heel, 5 trotters, 4 penny worth of scallops, and could you oblige me, mother, with a penny stamp?
All right, take it in my bedroom, if you like.
Yes, good. What about the smell?
It'll have to put up with that.
What's your name?
James B. Jervis.
What's the B for?
Bartholomew.
Bartholomew?
Now, Sarge, you let her out.
Lay there. Is that fresh? It should be. It was only caught this morning. Caught? Yes, in the mangle. Well, I'll take £1.50. £1.50? Oh, I'll have to sell it by the pound. Only by the yard. Yes, beautiful bit of stuff. Make a lovely set of bagpipes, too. The old king's here. The old judge's rate, I now declare the court open. Do you mind putting your elbow on there? How much you want? I'll take 2 inches. Before you go in the basement, there's some special silk commandos. Commandos? Kimonos, silk kimonos. Oh, I remember my grandmother had one of those kimonos. Only hers was made of mahogany. Ooh. I go, my skin stretching. I'm a swell guy. Stop gassing.
It's about time you did it all.
Hey! Is it you that's pulling around the damn barman?
the chap at the end there who was outdoing John Cleese a couple of decades before Monty Python was Nat Jackley, who Beatles fans may know from Magical Mystery Tour. They had him in that. So, you might have also noticed quite a unique shooting style with all those things. They're just one shot, which was John's style, which we'll come to lately. But the Blakeleys up in Manchester. So who were the Blakeleys? I hear no one cry. Well, the Blakeleys were a family who owned cinemas in Manchester from about 1908. And in 1915, John E Blakeley, the young son of James Blakeley, decided to take a punt on Charlie Chaplin's first full-length feature, which was Tilly's Punctured Romance. And he got the exclusive rights to distribute it in the Northwest. And they made quite a bit of money out of this, and it really established the reputation of Blakeley's Central Film Agency. But in the late 20s, they went into making movies. Well, call them movies. They were what are called sing-along silents. Obviously, with them being silent movies, you literally just needed a camera, editor, boof, you were away. And what these would be is he'd go and film an opera. They, in the cinema, which were these penny gaffs where it was literally a blanket and a few benches, they would project an opera, a silent opera, and they would have a quartet of singers who would have mirrors in front of them to see the film, and they would sing the opera for you. An enterprising idea. However, in 1927, when talking pictures came about, the bottom fell out of the silent movie industry as such. And so in 1932, hey, look at that. In 1932, at the Midland Hotel, August 2nd, 1932 actually, Laurel and Hardy were in town for one night, and Bert Tracy, who was a Mancunian comedian who'd worked out in Hollywood with Laurel and Hardy, introduced James Blakeley and John E Blakeley to Laurel and Hardy in the Midland Hotel. Some amazing guy. This is, you know, you can imagine this was somebody with a load of rods and a great big camera on the shoulder, went and get us a snap. It's not like now with you, oh, get us a selfie, is it? Think about it. Someone took a photograph of them with Laurel and Hardy. Amazing. They were in town one night. Anyway, Stan Laurel decided to say to them, "You still making pictures?" He said, "No." He said, "Why?" He said, "Talkies." I sound like one of them now. And there were no sound studios up in the north at all. So he said, "Well, why don't you film them in London, bring them up here, distribute them?" "Good idea," says he. So on that very day, Stan Laurel gave him the idea to set up the Mancunian film studio. So the 1932 Britain, as you know now, there was a real north-south divide with these movies, but I mean back then you had a bigger north-south divide. You had the Hunger Marchers leaving the north, being cheered, and when they arrived in London, they were met with the police, they were met with violence, and they had their 1 million strong signature to abolish the means test taken from them. Couldn't get much more of a divide than that, could you? So whilst the north was knackered with all the textile industry and all the depression, yada yada, the BBC were opening broadcasting house. So you could see it weren't all lobster in Langhams, was it? So here we go. Here are the people. He needed a star. Who did he get? George and Beryl Formby. Let's have it right, because these first two movies that John E Blakeley made were with George and Beryl. Now, these were made, the first one was Boots Boots, which was in 1934, and the second one was Off the Dole, which we'll come to in a minute. But, crucially, he was playing, George in this was playing John Willie, who was his dad's character. So he was still George Formby Sr. And Beryl was very much part of the act. Now, like I say, they were made very cheap, on the cheap. This cost $3 grand to make. But George, I think next, I'm right in saying, I've got a clip of George describing the making of it from, has anyone seen his last TV show where he describes his career, the Friday show?
I was playing in a place called Warrington, and a man called John E Blakeley came round and he said, "I'd like to make pictures with you." I nearly grabbed his hand off. Anyway, he said, "Come up on Sunday and we'll talk it over." So we went up on the Sunday and we talked it over. And he said, "Yes, I'd like to make pictures, but I haven't got a story." I said, "I have." And we brought out this little story that we'd written. It was called Boots Boots. So the whole thing was settled. We came to London and we went to the film studios. Studios. One room over a garage in Albany Street. And when we wanted to start making the picture, we had to press a button so that they stopped the engines down below. Well, at the end of 14 days, we'd finished the picture. and it cost the large sum of £3,000. Well, then came the time to sell it. Nobody wanted to buy it. But it did get a world premiere in a place called Burslem. It did, you know, and I'll never forget, because I went up there and it's strange as it may seem, it packed him out. So,
George and Beryl, there's George with John E Blakeley in Albany Street with the sound recording equipment. George looking quite puzzled. I mean, Beryl's the power behind the throne, as we all know. Anyway, it was so successful they made another movie, which was Off the Dole. Again, George playing John Willie. But the thing here is, Basil Dean of Ealing Studios decided to take a trip of the provinces, as they were then called, and he noticed all the people that were queuing up outside the George Formby pictures that were making, in the words of Ben Warris, an absolute fortune. So he decided to poach him for Ealing Studios, and indeed Formby did save the day for Ealing a little later in the day. The movie, like he said, was shot over a garage in London, and it was the budget was so low they had to shoot the concert scenes in darkness because there was no set. So I want you to see this next bit now. Amelia's, these movies aren't, you know, the height of movie making, but what they show you is the origins of Formby's career and the origins of Mancunian films. So there's a few scenes here from Off the Dole and Boots. So let's have a look. Let's have a look.
Now here's a new amusement that is getting all the rage. You'll find that it's good exercise for folks of every age. Now I go there most every night and sometimes take the wine. I've never had so many ups and downs in all my life since I've been sitting on the ice in the ice rink. Sitting on the ice with my skates off. It's the finest fun I've ever had. Put it on the ice, it'll never go bad. There's lots of nice young ladies, and how I like to tease them. If they don't give way or say okay, I sit them on the ice and freeze them. Daft thing, you might have kicked anybody then. Oh, come here, that's no good at all. You're too slow.
Am I?
Yes, you want more fire in your feet. Bit of life. Like, watch me, like this, look.
Like that?
No, not like that, but you see the idea.
I don't.
Well, come over here, then you can dance better.
All right.
Get in here, then.
What, up here?
Yes, well, give me this. You'll not need that.
Uh-huh. Oh,
Now,
fine.
listen, I'll play this, and when you hear me play, you start dancing.
All right.
And the faster I play, the faster you dance.
Splendid.
Now, are you ready?
I'm ready.
1, 2. No, it's no good. You're not dancing fast enough. You want more life into it.
Well, I can't dance any faster than that.
Oh, you will in a minute. When I start again, are you ready?
I'm ready.
1, 2.
What's that? It's only that crazy boots, I suppose. Just wait a minute.
All right.
I didn't know that chap was so clever. The man's marvellous. Aren't we rather wasting our time? Go and tell Cassandra to get out. Get out? We won't want him anymore.
It's the funniest thing I know.
It gets a hold, makes you hot and cold.
It even makes a fella wish I get bold. It teases you.
It freezes you.
Then it tingles.
And it pleases you.
Of love the poets have often sung. There's many a man for love been hung. Get the shades better if you get it when you're young.
Oh, isn't
Isn't love a very funny thing? It's the funniest thing I know.
First you get a hug, then you get a squeeze.
And you get a funny feeling round your housemaid's knees.
two films were made in one room above a garage, and like George said, they had to press a buzzer and they stopped hammering, and it's quite incredible. One thing to Beryl's credit is that after these movies and Basil Dean signed George up, he didn't want Beryl, and she said, right, and she just moved out the way and let George get on with his career, and I think that's quite amazing, really. But anybody who knows about George knows that Beryl was the power behind the throne. So now he'd gone, he'd made an absolute fortune, Blakeley, from the two movies, but now he had no star. So, enter this man, Mr. Randall. You see, the thing is about the difference between northern comedy and southern comedy, back then it was a very, distinct two things. Jimmy James, the guy you saw earlier, and we'll go into his stuff more later, his son Jimmy Casey, who took over from Jimmy James later on in the act, Jimmy James said, write some stuff, we'll take it down to Blakeley, and you'll see what he says in the morning. He took these jokes down. And Blakeley looked at it, he said, yeah, very good, son, this is southern comedy. I said, well, what do you mean? It's all words. I just want people to fall about, But we'll go into John's practices more. Frank was another guy from Wigan. He was actually a boyhood friend of Formby's. But Frank, when he was a young lad, he used to walk 30-odd miles to Blackpool and 30-odd back just to busk doing his Charlie Chaplin impression. And anyway, eventually he moved to Blackpool because his parents were like, oh, well, we better get you there. And he made his professional debut when he was 14. He was an acrobat originally. And he ended up going through a number of different groups, and the one that gave him the name was the Bouncing Randalls. He was born as Arthur Hughes, and then he was Arthur McAvoy, and then he joined an acrobatic troupe, became Arthur Twist, and then he became Frank Randall, a man of many names, and somebody who was more or less a cross between Keith Richards and Frankie Boyle, really. And that is no understatement, seriously no understatement. Jeff Nuttall, who wrote Bomb Culture, I don't know if you've ever read Bomb Culture, he wrote the definitive biography of Randall in the 70s. King of Twist, and it is unashamedly. The guy was absolutely, I've not moved on me, sorry. Technical stuff. He was the bad guy of his day. The theatre act, everything had to go through the Lord Chamberlain, as you know, all his scripts, but he deviated from them so often, he pronounced himself as star of stage, screen, and magistrate's court. And literally, when he was in the court, the touts would sell tickets for the public gallery. No joke, because his performances were so humorous and amusing, he used to get off with a fine. And so what he did was he'd pay the fines and just keep saying what he wanted to do, and the people loved him. And northern people, going through this depression and stuff like that, John E Blakeley knew what they wanted, and he knew Randall was the man packing him out in the music halls. So he was going watching him every night. And he was the king of comedy in Blackpool. The story goes, 1936, Blackpool Winter Gardens. He's doing a double bill with George Formby, and he blows Formby off the stage. Leading Gracie Fields to come on stage and on the microphone say, Frank Randall is the greatest comic actor I've ever seen, which annoys George and Beryl. So the BBC are transmitting this show, and on Beryl's orders, they edit all Frank's bits out of what they transmit. So he comes on stage the next night, Frank, and he says, ladies and gentlemen, the BBC in their infinite wisdom have decided to broadcast this wonderful show we are doing. But they have decided to remove, but they have said that George Formby is the only one worth listening to. So, with that in mind, I present you George Formby, and walked off and left George Formby to do the show. So there was an enmity, there was a rivalry from there on in. But like I said, Frank was the king of Blackpool, and Blackpool in the 30s and 40s for people in the north was somewhere they could escape from the drudgery and, the real hardship that people in the north suffered. But that gave it its great community spirit, which is what made the music halls shine and what made cinema shine. Now, his great partner in crime was this fella. No, it isn't me, ladies. It was this fella, Joseph Locke, who was so prodigious in his drinking and womanising that in Blackpool he was known as Lock the Cock and Lock Up Your Wives. Now, him and Frank were just absolutely... They were, like I say, Keith Richards and Frankie Boyle rolled into one. And Frank, more often than not, was seen driving down the front in Blackpool in his Lagonda. These guys were on £1,000 a week in the late 30s. Can you imagine? I'd love to be on that now. They were on £1,000 a week each, these guys. And so Frank would be driving round in his Lagonda with a crate of Guinness on the passenger seat, and he would drink a crate of Guinness every day before he did anything. In the late 40s, he placed an advertisement, Frank, to say, chauffeur bricklayer wanted. And people say, well, why do you want a chauffeur-stroke bricklayer? He says, well, 6 days a week he drives me, then on the Sunday I go out and drive myself, and I get so pissed, I promise you that when I get back I knock my front wall down. Monday morning he's mixing the cement. Hence the chauffeur bricklayer. But Randall's scandals, despite everything, ran for 10 years. He had a group of about 80 people, stooges, comics and everything. And it was, people say it didn't work in the South. It actually did in certain smaller areas. But unfortunately, we haven't got all day to go on about Frank Randall. I'd love to. But Frank met John E Blakeley, who put him into the Somewhere movies, which are, to be quite honest with you, like the precursor of the Carry On film. The Carry On film owes a great debt to what Mancunian did, in all honesty. And John E Blakeley had his start, and he brought in some amazing, amazing people to be co-star with him. Dan Young, the dude comedian. Now, this is what, you know, you'd be lucky to find a photograph of this guy on the internet. But when I was a kid watching these movies on Granada, I know that's rubbish. It's not as good as the proper thing, I know. But bear with me. He stood out because of the little Hitler tash and everything, but the you know, the monocle and the dandy, the sort of the working class comics idea of what a toff is, rather than a real toff. There's something of the Dudley D. Watkins about these characters and these guys. You know, the early Beanos, the early dandies, the D.C. Thompson characters, and he could be Lord Snooty, couldn't he? There's his top hat on the table, and also these guys, Robbie Vincent and Harry Corris of Happy Drone, a BBC radio comedy show. Robbie Vincent, as you'll hear shortly, had a catchphrase of, "Let me tell you!" And believe me, it's funny when he does it. So they got these guys together into the movies and somehow managed to keep Frank under control, partially. Some of Frank's tricks, apart from annoying the local watch committee and contravening the Theatre Act, I mean, saying hell when you're dressed as a vicar on stage and saying King Faluk in a Chinese accent aren't that bad these days, but if you went off the script, if you went off piste as such, then you got a fine. So, Frank was known, if he disliked a theatre he was in, he would take an axe to the dressing room. He would smash it up. He also kept a Luger, loaded, in his makeup box, and there were frequent stories of him chasing co-stars and managers firing the Luger at him as he went. So, a little bit of a loose cannon, as you can see. But Frank was a genius, an absolute comedy genius, and that's why Bob Monkhouse in his autobiography goes on about Randall, and he says he used to cycle so many miles to go and watch him, you know, 30 miles there and 30 miles back, which is a reflection of what Frank did to go to Blackpool. It's quite astonishing, really, for a little lad. So, I think now the best thing to do, you've seen a little bit of Frank, but I think you need to really revel in a bit of Mr. Randall, so let's have a look.
Who the hell sent you here?
Who the hell do you think?
They must have dug you up.
Aye, digging for victory.
I suppose you had a job in civil life?
Yes,
But where?
I was a dentist.
You look it. You'd be a lot of good in the front line without any teeth.
I thought I had to shoot Germans, not chew them.
Let me tell you.
Listen, unconscious, I'm not speaking to you.
No, but you will do soon.
Baby who never spoke a truer word. I suppose you have a name?
Yes, please.
What is it?
Winterbottom.
Fancy being in the army with a name like Winterbottom and only one blanket. Open your mouth. Blimey, there's a hole in your sock.
Well, I only came here to help the king and country.
You'd be no help, you'd be a drag on them.
Listen, chum.
I'm no chum of yours.
Oh, I can see that.
Do you know what I am?
Yes, Colonel.
I'm a sergeant. Do you know how I became a sergeant?
Aye, bravery.
No, bribery.
Where's that bucket of water?
Coming up, coming up, coming up!
Oh, dear. I won't want that. Oh, help! Where are you?
Oh, diddle-diddle-diddle-dee. Oh,
Oh, see, that was me.
Oh, yeah?
You. Get off my foot.
Dear madam?
Yes,
You, sir?
Aye, I might as well. By gum, the little ones, aren't they? Good health. You better fetch them in pint pots next time, will you? They taste all right, too. Good health. Ah, thank you. I'll have that as a chaser. Yes, I never leave out if I can help it. Good health. Fetch some more, will you? Aye.
Where's Randall? Where have you been?
I've been in the beauty chorus, but the sergeant was jealous.
Oh. Get out. Have you seen a cartload of monkeys go by?
Why, have you just dropped off?
I'll drop you off. You know who you're talking to? The sergeant. That's me,
Well,
sergeant.
What am I?
You're nothing.
Oh, you've got a good job.
What's that?
Sergeant over now.
I seem to know your face.
Well, I've had it a long time.
Why don't you wash the back of your neck?
I've got no soap.
No soap. You've got a tongue, haven't you?
But it won't reach the back of my neck.
What's the matter with you, vacant?
I was just thinking
Thinking what?
how uncomfortable it would be sitting on the point of a bayonet.
That might be possible yet.
Yeah.
A rookie, eh? First time on parade?
Yes, sir.
Sir? Nay, sonny, not sir. Think again. What do they call me?
I could tell you.
Shut up, you. Sergeant, remember?
Yes, sir, Sergeant.
Well, as long as you take notice of everything you're told, everything will be okay. But I'm sorry with this bunch of bomb pots.
You'll be all right with us, kid. Do as I do, and it'll be right.
Heaven forbid. Get back to your place.
Hey! I'm not going to have a bath. I'm not going to cut my toenails. I'm doing now. I'm sick and fed up. I'm stopping where I am. I'm not going to Blackpool. I'll come in Susan time, that's what I'll do. I'll cut my throat with a screwy brush. I'll go to the warm-up and I'll eat it. I'm going back to bed. I'm through.
I wonder where the nearest pub is.
I knew that. You come back here and why don't you get this off and get yourself respectable?
I'm all right.
What do you mean you're all right? I've never seen anything like it. You know what you ought to do?
What?
You've got to settle down here before you go out looking for pubs.
My trouble is going to be settling up. Never mind settling down.
Where do you think you're going?
I was only after a bit of...
Yes, I know. I'll attend to that.
Any more in the family?
Yeah, my mother, my dad, Sally, Eric, Hilda, Annie, Charlie, Harry, Betty, Jane, Peter, and myself.
And yourself.
Good heavens, what a family.
Good heavens, what a father.
Hey, just a minute, father. Why fling thy thwarts in my face?
What?
Why fling thy thwarts in my face?
Swat?
Hmm.
Why fling my swats in my face?
Yes.
I never flung a swat in anybody's face.
You know, his thwarts have a powerful sting.
Do they? I did not know I'd stung him with my swats.
Why? Can't you tell when you're gonna thwart me?
Thou must let me know the next time I swat thee. But surely thou wouldst not stop me from swatting thee.
No. Thwart away, if it makes thee happy.
So be it, to swat or not to swat. That is the question. And to
Wonderful, just wonderful stuff. One point about Frank is, you may have noticed he had false teeth. He didn't have them in every movie. He actually had them removed voluntarily when he was in the acrobatic troupe, so he'd look more comedic. Now, that takes some doing, doesn't it? But he had various catchphrases. You heard one then, get off me foot, which actually works really well. And, bye, I've supped some ale tonight. So the thing is, you know, people say that regional accents weren't in cinema until the kitchen sink stuff. There you've got Frank saying, oh, you've got a good job, Sergeant, or nout, you know, and it'll be right. These are phrases I grew up hearing, so there was a lot of self-indulgence in that one. But Frank kept people's spirits up in the north during the war, and he actually, rather than cozy up to authority, even in the movies, he's taking the rise out the sergeant, he's telling him off, he's having a laugh with him. So these work really, really well with northern audiences, but of course the war ends, and so Blakeley goes with the times and produces Home Sweet Home, Demobbed, Holidays with Pay. These are all things that, again, reflect their audience. And, you know, Holidays with Pay is going to Blackpool. You just saw him. The reason the clip was in there about him not wanting to go to Blackpool, and he's saying, you know, I'm not going, I shall cut me throat with a scrubbing brush, is because my nan used to tell me a story about my granddad. He booked them all on a trip. And then on the day of it, he was saying, I'm not going, you know, and don't be surprised when you come back if you find me hanging from bog chain. Northern men. So Frank was the star of these pictures. He was a big, big national star, and he was a huge star in the north. Well, he wasn't really a big national star. I don't know what I'm saying. But he certainly was famous enough to have nationwide notoriety. However, they made this movie under new management. You can see Nat Jackley at the back. And making movies down in London and preparing them and scripting them and everything else up in Manchester was becoming not only very, very expensive because of the picture boom after the war. The government set strict quotas that 20% of pictures were to be homegrown, they were to be British made. And so studio space was very difficult to find down in London because everyone was making pictures. So they decided on a train ride back, right, that's it. Finally, I think we should set up a studio up the north. So, John, on the train ride back with his sons John Jr. and Tom Blakeley, decided they would go for it and they would find premises and go and set up north. Now then, this is the Wesleyan chapel they found on Dickinson Road, which they, unbelievably enough, turned into 2 separate sound stages, kitted out with all the Vitaphone equipment, etc. And it was purpose-built, and now they could make movies in Manchester as well as plan them. It cost a total of, in 1947, it cost 80,000 quid to do this. And he did this by selling shares and getting a board together, one member of which, I love the name of it, is Jimmy Brennan, who was the local scrap dealer, who he just evokes, you know, Bill Fraser in Ripping Yarns. I love scrap. I've always loved scrap. So Jimmy Brennan chucks a load of dosh in, as does, and this is where it gets a bit tricky now, because what John E Blakeley invites Frank Randall to do is to join the board of Mancunian Films. I think you could see a conflict of interests is looming. But anyway, the studio was absolutely spot on and perfect. It was the first film studio outside the capital. What John E did was quite miraculous, to be quite honest with you. And here's the grand opening. There's George. There's Mr. Randall next to him, Betty Jamal, Mr. Blakeley and Sandy Powell, who starred in the first movie that they made in Manchester, which was Cup Tie Honeymoon. So Sandy Powell had finally took the King's Shilling and joined Mr. Blakeley in Manchester. It's his first movie for them. As a piece of its time to capture Main Road, the old Man City ground, and to capture these streets, it's absolutely invaluable. But it's not a bad movie either. I think now we'll have a little look at a bit of this one. Yeah.
It only seems like yesterday when we were in uniform, keeping fit and doing our bit.
This is very good. I've been abroad for 5 years. I come home, you give me spam for my supper, half the pubs are closed, queues all over the place, rationing the bread, wheatening the beer, and my wife on nights, eh?
Sandy, where are you going?
Back to ruddy Germany.
Hey, that's your plate. What? That's your plate. Don't talk to me like that. I told you I like. There's my plate. Put those plates down. Don't argue the point. Put them down. Certainly. Sit down. Sit. Oh, you don't like the place, do you? I don't like the place. I don't like your fish. Oh, you don't? And I don't like your... That's what I think about your pies, and that's what I think about your tripe. Oh, and I don't like you, and what's more, I don't get enough to eat, do you? You don't get enough to eat? No, I don't. You don't? No, that suits me. Well, there's some peas to take home with it. Well, there, I'll be right. Don't do that to me. Oh, it's like anything like that. Oh, if you want to play, that's all right. There we are, my boy. There we are.
The thing about that one, I've spun on a little bit here, because we are short on time. The thing about John E Blakeley's movie making, which you may have noticed, is it's very much single camera, and I don't know if you've noticed with all the line fluffs, but it's very much improvised. Jimmy Jewell and Ben Warris, I'm sure many of you remember, Sheffield born, well, they were actually both born in the same bed 3 years apart. Sheffield born double act. Jimmy Jewell went on to star in Nearest and Dearest and much other stuff, but they went and made a few movies because it was up in Manchester, and Jimmy Jewell in particular was surprised at how John made films. I was considering writing this down and explaining to you myself, but I do think it's better coming from the horse's mouth, to be quite honest with you. So, look at you poor projectionists, I'm sorry. You'll have to get on that light switch again. I think it's better that you hear it from the horse's mouth, as it were.
When you get a script, as from John E's, you would have blank pages with BUS on top. And the very first script I ever saw, didn't know what it meant. So I thought, well, I've got to find out from somebody and not show my ignorance. And I found half the notes. So I said, what does this BUS mean? He said, oh, that's business. He said, that means the artists, they go on and do their business as such, you see. So then I found out that this is what it was all about. And Johnny would get, it could be Dan Young, Frank Groves, Betty Jamal, see, get them all together. He said, now, have you seen the script? And it was just a vague idea. So they'd have to go away and work out what they were going to do. And then he'd give them about 20 minutes or something, you see. And then he would say, right, are you ready then? And they say, yes, fine. He'd say, go on, be funny for 5 minutes. And he just used to stand there and wait until he realised he'd got the laughs he wanted, and then he'd cut.
So we walked on the floor, and I said, where's the script, John? He said, you don't want a script. He said, I said, well, he said, go on, be funny. I said, what do you mean, be funny? He said, well, smash a few of those test tubes. So we finished up smashing the setup, you know, pulling things over. No script at all.
Come on. If I don't, there's something wrong here. If I don't see it, there's something wrong. There's something wrong. Come on. There's something wrong. That's enough. That'll do for now. Come on. Open that there. Open the door. Open the door! Open the door! Is it only that time? I let go of his head. He's lost it here. The
What amazes me about that, I mean, it's just the way, you know, they had 20 minutes. It's enough, isn't it? You know, and then be funny. It astonishes me. These movies were actually staged rather than directed. He just set his camera up, told them to be funny, and press go. But, I mean, you've all been laughing. I love these movies, and they just capture people in a time that are totally gone, and they were huge financial successes, not in the south where they wouldn't play, but certainly in the north. One thing about Cup Tie Honeymoon you might have noticed was the glamorous lady with Sandy Powell was a girl called Pat Pilkington, who ended up changing her name to Pat Phoenix and became Elsie Tanner in Coronation Street. But she was a very young actress then. But yes, I mean, these guys knew their trade. John E Blakeley was very good at going to the music hall and identifying who was popular and who knew their trade, because he knew that when he turned up, he didn't have to muck about with the script. All these films are essentially people's acts stringed together with a very, very loose plot, and it's usually a young girl and a young guy who are getting together, and you know, it's quite incidental to what Frank and all them are doing, which is stealing the show. But the place in Dickinson Road, the old chapel that was converted, was known by two names really to the locals and everyone who worked there. It was known as Jollywood because it was such a family thing. At the back there with the cigarette, you could see John Blakeley Jr. in the middle, Mr. Locke, the ubiquitous Mr. Locke. On the right there is John E Blakeley Sr. and sat down is Tom Blakeley. It was a real family place. John E Blakeley, you see his coat there, that was his director's coat. Ben Warris said he came in, he was a very dour little man, he says, who came in, took his black Homburg off, took off his jacket, put on his director's coat, zipped it up and thought he was the greatest director in the world. Now, you've just heard John's methods. He may not have been the greatest director in the world, but the contribution to the historical documents of those times is actually quite... There's nothing to compare to what he did to record all these music hall acts and everything, because they're gone. All this world has gone, you know? So we're back in Manchester, obviously, and he returns to some old reliables to make another movie. And there's the Jollywood guys. As you can see, they used to call in even the cleaners and everything for a staff photo. Everybody felt as though they were part of it, and they all called John Pop. But this is who he brought back for the next movie. Jimmy James, the man who was the finest teetotal, non-smoking drunkard act ever. And Norman Evans, who I'm sure you know, had a character called Fanny Furbottom, which was wholesale stolen. Les Dawson admitted that he stole his act for Sissy. And also now, I don't like to mention Mrs. Brown's Boys, you know. It could produce a terrible smell in the room. But there's another person who stole his act. So there's Fanny, resplendent. And this next movie was called Over the Garden Wall. Again, capturing two incredible performers with two incredible acts. People could not compare to them. There were a lot of guys did drunk acts, and there were a lot of guys did drag acts, but nobody compared to these two. One of the things they did when making this movie is they shot some stuff in Bellevue Circus in Manchester, and Johnny, always with an eye on the shilling, said to people, come and meet the stars of Mancunian films, come and mingle, blah, de, blah, de, blah. And actually, they turned up in the hundreds for this and paid a shilling each, and they were alarmed to get in there to find they were extras. There was no Frank Randall, there was no one. And a lot of the, you know, blows were struck that day because he was like, right, left, right, ordering these people around who'd paid a shilling to be extras, really. So Johnny certainly knew what he was doing, but the movie industry in the country at the time was on its knees a little bit, and the National Film Finance Corporation was set up to loan money to studios, such as Ealing and Gaumont, and Mancunian, despite the reservations, because, believe me, in the South, these movies were hated because they were tawdry, because they were cheap, and Blakeley's practices were frowned upon, just putting a camera on people, you know. Heavens Above, Norman Evans Above, that was his radio series. Hey, what a link. So, Over the Garden Wall was made with the first slew of money that they had, and I think, again, whistle stop, but we'll have a little clip from it. First up is Jimmy James doing his drunk act, and then we'll go to Mr. Evans.
Shh, quiet. If you wake the wife to send for a copper and none of us all locked up. Unbelievable. Sit down, let's have a drink. All right. Is he spilling it? Yeah, I know you. I've never met you somewhere before. Were you in the 8th Army? Yes. I knew. As soon as I saw you in that position, I knew. Do you remember me, the water card corporal? No. I remember you. Sit down, I'll bring your memory back. Do you remember... Move up a bit, Charlie. Hey. You pushed me then. Do you remember Ginger Dunn? Ginger Dunn, the cook? The old missile expert? Oh, what are you doing? Flipping them in the fat. That's what Ginger used to do with the rissoles. I've often wondered what he used to do with the rissoles. Poor old Ginger. We'll drink to the memory of Ginger Dunn. A lovely thought. I'm with you there, pal. I think I am, right? To Ginger. Ginger. He'll drink first. You remember Ookie Walker? Ookie Walker? There's Charlie and me yet to do Ginger Dunn, if you don't mind. Where's yours? It's underneath yours, if we can get to it. Ookie's had it. Ookie's had it? I thought it was him that had it. We'll drink to the memory of Ookie Walker. Who will? We will. Oh, no, you'll have none left for yourself if we do. To Ookie Walker. Ookie Walker. We'll be in the first three, don't worry. And Ginger Dunn. You've done Ginger Dunn. Let me do a bit of remembering. Do you remember the double fusiliers? Here's still a lot of them.
Who threw that through my window there? Willie Schofield? I'll bet you're a hero. You might well run away. Get off. Go down and get seen. Messing about with he, we're going to get no eggs at all. Hey, I'm glad I've seen you. I was going to ask you, have you got a bit of lard you can lend me? Because I thought you hadn't. No, it is. Very scarce, yes. Anyway, I was going... How is Joe? He's at home, you know. He's pottering about in the garden. He's rolling the way, you know. They are the better off at work of these men. I've said so many times. Well, I made up my mind I was going out this morning. It's soon... I mean, if you don't get out, it's dinner time, and then you get... Oh, you do. Yes, it's right bad. How are you these days? Have you? Oh, I say. Have you really? Well, I haven't been well myself, you know, because... Have you? What do you mean, then? Well, yes. It'll make you feel a bit worried, won't it? I wouldn't bother if I was you. Oh, no. Perhaps it's this here bread, you know, you can't tell. Yes. Oh, a bit of bicarbonate will shift it, you know. I shouldn't worry over that because Yes, I saw your old man this morning. He's looking very well, isn't he? It's what? Middle-aged spread? Oh, I'll get some of that. Is it on point? Because... Well, you know, I haven't been well myself. I haven't, honestly. I keep begging along, you know, but with me... Well, no, I keep having them hot sweats, you know. It does. It takes it out of you, you know. These men, they don't. They don't know what it is. No, well, he's the same. It's a funny thing, you know. I was only saying last week... It's giving me a belt. That's the third time on the same brick this week, you know. I'll have to watch myself. How's your dog going on these days? Getting better? Our cat? Oh, it's finished. Oh, no. It smells, you know, too. Everyone's doing away with. Yes, if I go, I can smell it in the custard on a Sunday. I suppose I'll have to take it to all soft at our house, you know. It'll be me that'll have to go to town hall with it, you know. It is. Anyhow, who has we? Ah, shit. Who do you mean, Mrs... No, I won't say a word. Oh, no, I never talk. Just a minute. Well, I'm not surprised. I'm not a bit surprised. I told her she would go to those illuminations. I'm not a bit surprised. Do you know, I never did like that coach driver. I know. He tried it on me. He did that. Yes. Didn't he? Oh, yes. No, you see, he started messing about with his gears. Well, hello, what's that? That's my pudding. Oh, I forgot all about it. It's my rice pudding. I've left it on. It'll be burnt to a cinder. Our Joe play a little L. Right-o, I'll tell you all about it later. Right-o, ta-da! She's standing on a tub,
Well, you can't write that, can you? You know, you've just got to film it. Norman Evans, the marvellous Norman Evans from Rochdale. 1950. Things are really on the decline with the British film industry, sadly, and the National Film Finance Corporation are calling the loan early, which puts Mr. Blakeley in a spot. The thing is that the National Film Finance Corporation, I should have said NFFC, I knew I should, Lord Reith and Mr. Rank despised Mancunian films and so deliberately decided to call a loan in early in order to tank the company. So there was a little wait really to try and get the money together. He had a choice, Blakeley, do I pay the loan off or do I make another film? And he paid the loan off, which was to get them off his back, but unfortunately it left them in a bit of a spot. The slump in the movie industry made it easy for Blakeley to get techies to come up north, which hadn't been quite so easy earlier on. So he was okay with staff, but sadly lacking on finance. So there he is in Jollywood, totting up the shillings as a very thrifty man, Mr. Blakeley. But unfortunately the days really were numbered for Mancunian, which, as you can see, isn't surprising, seeing as they made films which were for a smaller proportion of the population, shall we say. Added to that, there were a lot of problems with Mr. Randall, who was getting worse and worse. Have you ever seen anyone sat with 6 boxes of cigs for a drink up? Frank was getting worse and worse and worse. He was drinking a crate of Guinness in the morning, and then he would just go. He would leave the studio for days with Joseph Lott. They'd go all around Cumbria, they'd go all around the Pennines, getting drunk as they went, and then he would return, and as soon as he walked onto the studio floor, John E Blakeley would say, right, that's lunch. And so this would annoy Randall even more. He'd go to his dressing room, smash a few things up, maybe fire his gun, and then someone would have to go and talk him round and get him down onto the set. So, you know, I mean, any of you out there who are in the performing industry in any capacity know money. Time is money, and you just cannot keep making movies under these circumstances. So they decided to make an effort to try and raise some money, and they were hiring the studio out. So between 1951 and 2, it was being used by other people. But they decided they finally had the money, and they made It's a Grand Life, which I think you can see there as a rather interesting person listed in the cast. I believe there's a dotty thing. Give me a look at that. Isn't that amazing? Right, You see that name? Diana Dawes. When Diana Dawes ruled the earth. Thank you. She was sent there, really, she said in her autobiography, as a punishment by rank for some indiscretion. And she described Randall as mad and drunk. But you could be the judge of that, really, from this scene. See what you think of the way Frank speaks here and delivers his lines.
How do you do? Oh, glad you... I want to get you interested in my bazooka.
What are you doing dressed like that?
I'm impersonating the Colonel.
Why?
He's under the affluence of Inkwall. I mean, he's subtle, top secret.
Oh, I see.
Yes. Well, if the boys don't mind.
No. I've got a job to do. I've got to go and see the Sergeant Major. I'll see you later, huh?
Very good. Bye-bye.
So I think you can see that Frank was probably more or less 2 parts pissed, wasn't he, when he did that, for the sound of his voice. But, you know, It's a Grand Life did well. Again, recouped all its money. But Johnny's getting old. He's approaching his 65th birthday. His health's not the best. Randall is insane. He's on the board of directors. So you've not just got a drunken, crazy star brandishing a gun. You've also got him in your board meetings when he can be bothered turning up. And the BBC were making bigger and bigger and higher offers for Dickinson Road because it was a good facility. They'd invested well and made something that was really worth having. So in '54, John decided to sell the business. That was it. And sadly, that was the end of the Mancunian experiment when he sold it on, and all those wonderful films that you've seen. And 1954, it was sold to the BBC, who started broadcasting there in '54. They broadcast Top of the Pops, Grandstand was broadcast from there. But Randall died in '57 of TB, of all things, and cirrhosis of the liver. Well, occupational hazard. Mr. Blakeley died himself in '58. George Formby died in '61 and Norman Evans died in '62, so it's sort of like all winding up sadly towards an end. The great thing about these films is that they capture a time and they document a people that are long gone. I was lucky enough when I grew up to be brought up by my, I don't know, do you say nan down here? Yeah? I was brought up by my nan, who was an incredible woman. She was born in 1908 and I was born in 1972. She had her first child when she was 22 and her last child when she was 50. So proper northern lass. And like I say, this brings back memories not just of her, but of all the people. Every street had a Frank Randall back then, a happy drunk. It was Burnt Meadows where I lived. And I'd be coming home from school every day and he'd be swinging round the lampposts, you know. But he was a nice fella. He used to ask me if I wanted to go with his senior service and a nip of his whiskey. I never did. But he was a nice guy. And the northern people back then, it's not that the north was better than the south or the south better than the north, you know, but the south was documented in its way. And John E Blakeley, I think, left a legacy, a cultural legacy, which is sort of criminally neglected. And I hope you think the same after what you've seen this afternoon. It's been very, very quick, I know, because we had a few technical problems. But I hope you enjoyed it, first of all. I hope I've managed to do justice to it and got my enthusiasm for these movies across. Oh, should be films, not movies, films. And so rather than end on any kind of sad note, really, I think that it's better to think of everything that was created and the wonderful music hall acts that were captured by John. And is there anyone wants to ask any questions? No? Yeah.
Are any of the films available on VHS?
Yes, they are. Yes, they're on DVD. I think it's the Odeon Entertainment Group. If you look into that, they will be able to provide those. I did contact them to ask if they wanted to sell some here today. Oh, another good thing you could do is buy this book, if you've got some interest in it. Two guys from Ashton-under-Lyne, two brothers called Philip Martin Williams and David L. Williams. Hooray for Jollywood, it's called. And the best place I've seen for it is eBay. They sell it themselves and they'll sign it as well, which is nice. Anything else? Right. I've not heard of him, but that's not to say he's not well known. I'm not the greatest scholar of music hall. There's people that we haven't even covered today simply because we don't have time, like Dougie Wakefield and his gang. And there are, there's many minor stars in all these films who have been forgotten. It would be great if there was more interest in preserving and also discussing and revisiting these movies, because I think it's a very interesting period of history and quite unique. I don't think anybody else. They say there was no, like I said, there was no regional accents in movies till the kitchen sink dramas of the 60s. Well, you just heard, people. I hope you can understand me, by the way. But you've just heard people who talk exactly as they would have done in real life. They didn't tone it down in any way. I mean, George Formby was very popular, but he was cheeky and Frank was filthy, But as he would say, no, I'm vulgar, But, Frank Randall, if he didn't like an audience, he'd take his false teeth out and throw them in the audience, So Frank was very, very much unique, but he did go down well in the South. People say he didn't, but he didn't go down well in the West End. But there are a few of the satellite theatres in the London suburbs that did great numbers, and his movies outstripped. The only movie that outstripped Somewhere on Leave in 1943 in the North was Mrs. Miniver. He was more popular than George Formby in the North, but his last is the Wood Green. I think it was the Wood Green Empire or something like that. Is that right? And in 1953, because he'd contravened the Theatre Act again by doing God knows what. I have not found that documented. But they sacked him on the spot and they wanted him gone. They had to get a court order to get him out of the dressing room. I mean, can you imagine that? How long must he have been in there for them to need a court order? He must have been in there weeks. I don't know who was smuggling the crates of Guinness in. But no, I mean, Frank Randall, you could be here all day going on about Frank Randall, but the lesser known stars, yeah, I'm not an authority on that. You need Mr. Hood. Hood, I mean, that's how you say it down here, isn't it? You need Mr. Hood to do that. Anything else? Oh, right, okay, yeah, Chris said. Yeah. That's right, yeah. Jack Warner and yeah. Yeah. That's right. Those People Next Door, isn't it, that one? Yeah. Oh, yeah. 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 Oh, I mean, fabulous. The drunk scene captured there with Jimmy and Eli. There's one story in Holidays with Pay where a set wasn't finished, a staircase, and he was like, oh, just do something. So Norman Evans is chasing Jimmy James up and down the stairs and his false teeth flew out. So for nothing, they got something really funny. Which I love about them. The films live and breathe. There's a lot of fluffed lines in there because they were making it up on the spot. I mean, Harry Corriss looks like he's reading something, doesn't he? But I do love Robbie Vincent. Let me tell you. Oh, it's just amazing. I just love it. I mean, I do hope that I've done them justice. You were there. I hope I've... Oh, did they? All right. I bet they had some bloody brass for doing that, eh? Bloody hell. Aye! Should have called me in. Well, like I said, I don't want to end on a downer because Jollywood was all about, having fun. Northern films for northern people, as John E Blakeley said. So I do hope you enjoyed that. And let's end with the man himself in... hey, look at that, 59 minutes. I'm good. Let's end with a bit of Mr. Randall doing what he does best, mucking about. Garçon?
Stand aside, please. Thank you. Well, first of all, good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon, Mr. Randall.
There you are. Politeness for a start, you see. Now, Baba, black sheep.
I'm ready, wool.
You see, they even know that, you see. Now then, gentlemen, at the word of command, 1, 2, just place your left toe forward in like manner, like that, you see. Now, go back to where you were. Now, all together, 1, 2. Jump, 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 da, jump, jump, da, jump. Off we go.
I think we could do with a few more soldiers throwing the guns away, couldn't we? And putting the bins on their head. Right, okay. Thank you all, and thank you up there. Cheers, chaps. Thank you. Cheers.
We made a big sensation when we first went on parade. The sergeant major held his breath and then knelt down and prayed. He sent for disinfectant and we all had to be sprayed. All hail, hail, all See, that was me.
Oh, yeah.
You, get off my foot.